Thank you, Dr. Kachor, for that beginning address. And I think you have set the tone for the evening. And I want to promise all of you that we're not going to, go beyond 6:30. And that's the time that we have. And I'll probably try and contain it within that much time because you've had a long day already. And as you very rightly said, Dr. Khator, India is sitting at a tipping point where even the demographics that we talk about and the need for education and all. But yes, what we'll have to do is exactly something what you did at the University of Houston, in which you took some very difficult and unthinkable steps to take it to the next level. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in India. And I'm happy to share that, at forums like FICCI, where we have a very active higher education committee, a very active school education committee, we do engage with the government, we do engage with the private enterprise and the social enterprise to see what more can be done. Talking about diaspora, education as a sector provides a very unique opportunity for the Indian diaspora to connect with India and to remain engaged with India. It does definitely offer an opportunity of philanthropy in which you can come and, and many of the Indian diaspora are doing that already. It also gives an opportunity where you do philanthropy as well as you make an investment, which also gets you some reasonable returns. And, you build a sustainable model for that. And as you very rightly said, the fact for that is that the diaspora, not just in terms of running the institutions, but also the ones who have to teach there, have to come here. And in that, we have one such person sitting right here, who is Professor Rajkumar. After, Oxford and Harvard and the university in Hong Kong and everything, then you decided to come back and do a career here. So what would be your perspective of diaspora's engagement with India in that sense as a faculty?
Thank you, Dr. Jain. Thank you, Dr. Khator, for your inspiring reflections. Well, one of the big challenges in relation to the Indian universities' aspirations to be global institutes of excellence is the inability to attract good faculty. In fact, some of the very interesting predictions which was given in the context of the gross enrollment ratio that India has is that at the end of the day, with 700 universities and 40,000 colleges which we have, we continue to have a gross enrollment ratio of approximately 18%. This means that even with all these colleges and universities that we have set up, expansion being the most important objective of institution building in the last 60 plus years, we continue to have over 80% of India's eligible youth not in a position to enter into any of our institutions. So we have a huge institutional capacity problem. But at the same time, to respond to this institutional capacity problem, a couple of years back, then HRD minister said that we need to establish 1,000 new universities in 10 years to increase the gross enrollment ratio from 18% to approximately over 30%, which is the aspirational percentage that we want to have. Now, the fact of the matter is, little do we realize that we don't even have faculty members for the existing 700 universities and 40,000 colleges. In fact, if you look more deeply at the statistics, we have to acknowledge that the internal context of governance which can respond to the faculty challenges not adequately responding. So if you simply take the 40 central universities and the IITs and IIMs, which are supposedly well-governed and premier and well-resourced and well-funded, there is approximately over 40% of faculty positions, sanctioned positions, lying vacant in these 40 central universities and the IITs and IIMs. Now you can imagine the situation that prevails in the various state universities and private universities and all of that. So to address the point which is about faculty, we need to radically rethink and re-examine this situation that is prevailing in the institutional context as to how do we attract faculty. Now, one of the things which President Khator had mentioned is that what can the sort of universities around the world can do. And one of the things which, if you look at the history of foreign engagement with Indian institutions, I mean, IIT Kharagpur is a classic example. At that time, even in 50s and 60s, there was a very strong, deep and pervasive engagement of MIT in the establishment and development of IIT Kharagpur. And that real engagement is not some sort of faculty exchange and student exchange. We are talking of serious commitment on the basis of these, where faculty members come and spend substantial years, in establishing, developing both curriculum development, course structuring, and actually engage in the task of institution building. Unfortunately, the Indian regulatory environment, including something as basic as issuance of visas for foreign scholars to come and work here, has been quite pathetic, because which has discouraged the possibility of international engagement, and more recently, the more retrograde steps, including the new regulations governing, a setting up of international collaborations, or for that matter, the attempts to seek foreign investment and foreign universities coming into India. So one of the biggest challenges that we need to address with regard to this problem is the fact that our regulatory environment has to become more progressive. The existing context in which inspections, permissions, approvals, and the entire process of institutionalized forms of corruption that exists in the regulatory environment is not only conducive and not conducive for foreign institutions to come in, but even progressive, engagement within India has affected this possibility. And I'll stop here and maybe take.
Well, Professor, I think we are sitting here to attract investment into India for education, and well, of course, many of these problems do exist, and they do have, and we also did face when we were setting up the schools. But the fact is, if you are setting up something with the right mission, exactly what you are doing, so OP Jindal University today is a reality, and it's doing wonderfully well, and so are several other universities in India and schools also which are doing, and the government also on the other front attracting FDI. In education space in India, there are different measures that the government has already taken. There is an active route through which you can come and set up any institution in India. It's under automatic route. You don't need to take any permissions. There is a passive route also in which what foreigners can do, including the Indian diaspora. If you want, you can make an investment in India in setting up any educational infrastructure, or probably take over an existing educational infrastructure. And some states in India do allow a dismarriage between owning the infrastructure and running a university. So which means you can run a university from a leased campus. So there's somebody who has put in an investment of putting that real estate in place, and there's another guy or another entity which is running that university, and there is a commercial arrangement between the two. So you have made an investment which is a secure investment. You're making a yield return out of that and still making education happen. And there are quite a few other measures. Maybe I would now invite Dr. Indu Mohan Singh to just briefly run us through them, that what is the kind of mechanism on the opportunities that exist today in the present regulatory environment for an investment to come in education sector.
Thanks, Prabhat. In fact, I'm not a doctor, I'm just a lawyer. So let me just put the right perspective. And what we would like to say is that under the FDI, the government has opened the two routes. One for education falls under an automatic route. So this is investment in the education sector is allowed. Having said that, the challenges on the regulatory side is that it can only be run by a not-for-profit institution, which is either a Section 25 company, which is under the current act, but the new act is also there with a similar situation. Otherwise, you can have to open a trust or a society. So that brings in the real picture that you are allowed, but you're not allowed. Second thing is that the FDI in the infrastructure space is also permitted. This can run for profit. So the infrastructure the FDI can come into the companies which will focus on providing infrastructure only to the education sector. So that is permitted. So what Prabhatji is mentioning is that though there is a regulatory need for any institution to commence and to get a license, there are basic minimum requirements which they need to adhere to with regard to the basic threshold of the land or the developed portion of the institution which they need to demonstrate. Some of the private universities does allow, the private state acts does allow that this can be taken on a lease or on a commercial basis. But many of the acts still does not allow that. Many of the act, it requires that the institution or the sponsor of the institution must own it. So even though the FDI can come into the infrastructure space, which is willing to provide that infrastructure on a commercial basis to a not-for-profit organization, there are challenges in some of these states where the infrastructure ought to be owned by the university or the sponsors. So we have a lot of initiatives being taken. The participation of the private sector is openly being considered in the 12th plan by the government. And it is being recognized that we lack in the excellence, we lack in the quality, we lack in the research space, which Renuji just said. But the issue is that on the other hand, where are the resources, where are the financial funds? for how far one will like to keep investing into a structure which is not for profit, and it doesn't stop any organization to make a profit or an institution to make a profit, but only the problem is of funding it and taking it out. So this is like a half-hearted openness which we are doing, but probably the real intent would be achieved only when we allow the private sector to run and control many of these institutions, like the unregulated sector. You see that you are free to run, like Prabhaji is running an international school. He's running that into a commercial organization. So if those things are allowed, or at least you have a relook at your regulations, thereby the chunk of the investment which goes into the infrastructure piece, if this is separated and this is not made a mandatory requirement for the institutions to own that, probably a lot can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. But being an optimist, and which is what I generally am, I would like to say that the two modes that we spoke about, 100% automatic route allowed in FD in investment in education space. So somebody wants to do pure philanthropy, you don't have to go and run for permissions at least to put your investment here. And when it comes to infrastructure space, uh, if not in some states, if not exactly in the full university or something, you can set up that for say housing or other things which today is allowed. And if we talk about K to 12 schools, if we talk about play schools, if we talk about vocational centers, there's no restriction there, and you can have a full investment happening. And as Mr. Indamohan Singh also said, the 12th plan document, the 12th plan, 5-year plan document from the Government of India for the first time has a full paragraph on private for-profit investment in education. It says that now the time has come that at least we should start thinking about it. So there is a move or a direction happening in the right direction. We just need to see, things take time in this country given the socio-political environment, but I see that we are on the right path. Well, so that brings us to at least share from the investment perspective, what are the kind of real opportunities that exist today for investments to happen in the education space? Because I'm sure many of you who do track India must also be reading that there's so many seats going vacant in engineering, in MBA and things like that. And at the same time, we also talk about the huge gap, that there is a huge demand and there's not enough supply. So this is sort of a little confusing state. So is there really an opportunity for a fresh investment to happen in education space in India? For this, I'll first invite Amit to present his comments, since you're a large operator in education anyway.
Thank you so much. Please call me Addy. Can everyone do me a big favor? Raise your right hand. Raise your left hand. Stretch it. We're almost hitting that 6 o'clock moment. How many of you are actually NRIs? NRIs? How many of you are in academia? Academia? How many of you consider yourself to be from industry? Oh, wow. Who is everybody else? Okay. Both? Okay, so I will quickly want to run. So I am hugely optimistic and very pessimistic about the Indian education market. Just to give you a quick brief, I'm part of a 5th generation industrial house in India, and we run a very large nonprofit for the last about 45 years, where we run about 13 schools, 16 colleges, and a university. But we truly run them from a nonprofit perspective. But we're very engaged in trying to transform India and getting people to come in to explore this space. It's a very scary time for India, and I'm not sure why I'm not seeing more of this on the news. The government has admitted publicly, our Prime Minister and several major ministers, that every month 1 to 1.5 million young people will enter India's workforce for the next 5 years. That's 12 to 15 million people a year will be seeking jobs in India's economy. To put that in context, that is 4 Irelands, 1 Australia, 4 Denmarks, every year coming up and seeking jobs for employment. At a gross enrollment rate, which is today at 18%, most of these people are terribly unqualified for jobs. On the other hand, we have, let's say, our great IT sector, the so-called boom time for India. Somewhere in 2000, our great population liability became an asset. I don't know how they does magic accounting from liability side to asset side within 3 years. But the entire NASSCOM, that includes all IT services, BPOs, etc., is going to hire about 300,000 people next year. That's 25% of our exports, 10% of our GDP. That is 10 days worth of employment out of 1 year. This is the context in which India stands today and where education is required to really pull. On the other hand, I spend most of my time in industry, and for those who are in industry, you'll see a chronic shortage of skilled labor across the board, right from blue collar to managerial positions. So if, on one hand, these 15 million people coming in every year, on the other hand, you have a huge number of vacancies in the corporate sector. Education is what lies, and the opportunity for investment is it was lies between these two. Now, this said, education in India is the most regulated market, I think, in the entire country. It's also one of the most corrupt and awful place in the formal education sector. My advice to anybody who's investing in India, unless you have a unique connection to somebody in the government or a severe masochistic streak, please avoid trying to go into the formal education systems of schools, colleges, and universities. Okay, everybody here has gone through that route. They have gone pillar to post, they've gone from department to department, this, etc. It's not a place where you will make money. However, if you truly love this country and you want to make a high impact, then it's something that has to come in. But you have to approach it as something that is your main passion in life. If you approach this as another business opportunity, it's not big enough, it's not profitable enough, it certainly isn't worth spending so much time to actually invest. That's the formal, which I would call, and by formal I mean which you get a thappa degree, right? A university or a college or a school which is highly regulated. But this is not what you're going to use to convert this 15 million people a year into employable people. And that's the entire informal education sector, which is the most exciting, vibrant, open for investment, easy to do, highly unregulated, and things you can move fast on the ground. The wonderful part about the opportunity in India is that for an Indian family, education is the number one part. They will mortgage their house. They will take unsustainable loans. They will stop cancer treatments in order to provide their children with the opportunity to get better in life and to go up the ladder. So there is a huge amount of demand pent up. When these 15 million people realize they're not getting jobs, right? They are going to turn towards you to say, okay, I have a 4-year bachelor degree or a 3-year bachelor's degree, which isn't worth the paper it's printed on. I actually need to skill up now to go and get a job. And I think this is where a large amount of investment is required. Almost, and if you look at the companies who are in here, we've been here for a while, NIT, AppCheck, eValueServe, they're minting money. I think this is where the primary investment comes in. A lot of pre-kindergarten and schools is where the opportunities lie. But please don't come in thinking that, okay, 1 billion people, lots of money, etc. The problem is there's a sweet spot, right? And the sweet spot is between fees, between 20,000 rupees per year to about $1.5 lakh. This is where that sweet spot lies, is where it is profitable enough for you to make a venture that gets you money, but it's also something that has mass appeal and that people can afford. The problem is everybody here today is trying to set up a 5-star education establishment, maybe perhaps not from a quality perspective, but at least the campus. Nice reception, beautiful lobbies, good air conditioning system. But the number of people who can pay more than 2 to 3 lakh rupees per year on education, even levered up on loan, is limited, which is why you're seeing such an oversupply of seats. It's not that people don't want to get educated, they can't afford that price point, which is beyond that 1 lakh rupees. So again, finding that sweet spot for Indian investment, think non-regulatory to start with. You can always convert that into a regulated market after 2 to 3 years, once you've got experience, once you're in the game and you know the players. Think about that sweet spot between 25,000 rupees to about $1.5 lakh rupees, where you can get mass market in India and truly capitalize on the promise of those 15 million people who need that education, and think out of the box. With India, the resources in terms of finding faculty, in finding trainers is going to be hard. I hesitate, I'm a big proponent of information technology, I'm a geek's geek, but I hesitate to say that information technology will solve all the problems. It won't. But I think highly innovative business models that allow you to use a limited number of teaching resources to access a large number of people, practical training, internships, combinations with going to companies and getting them to outsource their recruitment training to you. These are massive, massive opportunities that exist. There's money for it, and the government is highly supportive of it. I request you to kindly look at the National Skill Development Council and allied bodies which are willing to put money on the table. One of the least talked about things was in this year's budget in March, the government started a program that for certain certifications, the government will pay students between, I think, 10 to 20,000 rupees to clear a single exam, right? I haven't seen many people take up that as a business model where the government is saying, you take an exam and we'll pay the student X amount of money. It's a great incentive, right? So please think outside the box. It's an amazing market to be in. It's just starting off and a lot of opportunity. Even don't get scared by the regulated side. That's not where the great stuff is happening in the next 5 years. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Adi. But at the same time, what I would say is, of course, you being 5 generations in an industrial family and has seen and experienced how this country has grown, and all those regulations and things like that. But I may also tell you that things are changing. We have seen things changing in Delhi as well, in the political scene. And I can say for my family for the last 13 years that we have been in education. We didn't know anybody important out there and still could do something. So there is a possibility things are changing and would happen. Professor Kumar, since you are in higher education, schools, of course, if I talk about school, because I'm in school education, there is an opportunity there also, but of a different kind in different cities. It has to be specific to a particular location where you go to. There is a good supply of schools already there, but still there is need in far and deep corners in India. In higher education, we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years, more than half a dozen good universities coming up, including 2 set up by both of you also. And we talk about other universities in NCR or down south. How do you see this opportunity on one side, on the other side, seats going vacant? Is there a need for excellence or innovation or things like that?
Let me just also start with the fact that the purpose and intention was not to scare away potential investments in higher education, but also to ensure that with some degree of intellectual integrity, we bring to the table the kind of issues which indeed confront the higher education space. One of the big, let me start with the good news. The good news, which we all should be conscious of, is that, with 1.3 billion people, over 65% of them are less than 35 years of age. That's 700 million plus people. So those are all, the demographic dividend that India will have. When good part of the developed world become older, India will remain younger. That means that there is an opportunity in terms of educating these young people. Now, I'd already earlier mentioned about the issue of quality and innovation, but let me just briefly also mention that one of the significant challenges of when a country is at the same time trying to focus on quantity and quality and address challenge of equity and accessibility, it is inevitable that it's going to suffer on a few things. And that's exactly what has happened, that we have to exponentially increase the size of the universities and the number of people coming into higher education. Now, where this space continues to exist is that in terms of, good institutions at the top level. So, for example, one of the big challenges that, the last few years, it's come to the serious focus of the government of India as well as the president and other leaders in higher education is that not a single Indian university is one of the top 200 in any of the rankings, including the QS World, the Times Higher Education, and the Shanghai Jiaotong rankings. And this includes the IITs and IIMs. And now, if you look at the last 20 years of developments happening, forget the US and UK and Australia and the developed world. If you look at East Asia, particularly Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Taipei, and of course mainland China, the last 20 years has dramatically transformed higher education in these countries. And you will find in all these rankings, some of these universities coming up in a significant manner. And I predict that the next decade is going to significantly increase the number of leading universities in mainland China, as well as other parts of Southeast Asia, figuring in this, in these rankings. This becomes important because, as again, President Katur had mentioned, the importance of research and contribution to knowledge creation is one of the major challenges of Indian higher education. And unfortunately, almost all public universities, and of course, most private universities too, are not in the situation to increase their capacities to have, to promote excellence. And there is a simple reason for this. Since I moved to India in 2008, I would have given over 1,000 talks across schools and colleges in India. And at the end of these talks, I almost always ask a question, how many of you want to become teachers? And you can go to the leading, I've spoken at IIT, to Doon School, to you name it, and not a single person is interested to become a teacher, become a professor. So you have a very strange situation where at the top end, you really are looking for institutions of excellence which can come to focus on research and innovation. And that is one significant area in which I think there is a good possibility for investment to come. It was earlier mentioned that you can create innovative models which will allow you to differentiate between the academic content and the curriculum and the course and the faculty on the one hand and the non-academic aspects of it. One of the big problems of any such approach is that at present there is a fair amount of dubiousness associated with private sector initiatives in higher education. If any serious foreign player is attempting to come into Indian higher education space, one needs to be conscious of the fact that this space needs to be there should be a higher level of integrity maintained in the process of establishing and development of institutions. And I entirely agree with Mr. Jain that there is a serious, the governments across the country, including the central government, is looking for such initiatives because of the fact that most of the initiatives that have come about in the private context in India are not promising enough for that. Unfortunately, that has not taken place. There is a case for that. Second aspect, I will just say that and finish it, is that, as it was mentioned earlier, in terms of continuing an executive education, there is a whole range of initiatives that are needed. Unfortunately, in the Indian context, the education happens after only at school, college, or university level, and after that people enter into the profession, and there is so little emphasis given to continuing education or executive education programs. In fact, this is currently managed through ad hoc programs that takes place within the organizations or companies or corporations, or for that matter, some of the few institutions, including universities, are undertaking it. There is a case for developing high quality continuing education programs across different sectors, including training programs, and I'm sure that space is something which is going to grow in the years to come. And the third aspect connected with this is that if a foreign player is seriously coming into India, I also think, particularly for the universities which may be present here, I would say that there should be a larger focus on establishing international collaborations with existing Indian institutions which are substantive in nature. I mean, one of the things that we have done, which we've been very fortunate to do, is to be able to not just develop faculty and student exchanges. We have dual degree programs. We have significant conferences that build relationships with institutions, and all of that has promoted the idea of a more stronger presence of foreign institutions in India. And that, I think, is a very constructive way of engaging with India, because you have an opportunity to contribute to the development of Indian higher education in ways that are much more needed than actually setting up a campus in India itself. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Kumar. So, basically we have discussed about several things. We have discussed about the opportunity that exists in this country. We have discussed about the bottlenecks which are there. We have discussed about still the initiatives which are happening. I can also share with you one initiative which has been done by Mr. Patel. I don't remember exactly which state in US, and he has recently set up a university in Baroda with private investment, with overseas investment. It's called the Oro University, which is running, and which I think started just about a year or year and a half back. So, we have a mixed bag of both things. Professor Kumar is absolutely correct that there does exist a big trust deficit in the government for the private enterprise to participate and do a good work in education. But that also is changing, and changing rapidly, because good institutions have come up. They have delivered results. They are already delivering, they're delivering even better results. When we talk about rankings, I'm sure most of you would have heard about the Indian School of Business, which is in Hyderabad, and it's ranked among the top 20 business schools in the world. So we have success stories also, though they are smaller islands for whatever reason, but there is a need to grow and do that more. So I think with this we have covered quite a few points. I asked my panelists if somebody wants to make any quick comments, and before we open it to the audience, Eddie, would you like to say a few?
Sure. I just want to clarify that please don't think of me saying that don't get into formal education, all that there is no opportunity. I didn't mean to sound that. I just realized a little bit may have sounded like that. There is a lot of opportunity, but if you're thinking as a business person, as a return on investment, it is a much longer play. It's a 5, 10, 15-year play. I'm very confident that the Indian government is committed at various levels, the center and the state, for reform and change. But it's not something that you will see tomorrow morning or day after. It's something that's more a 5 to 10-year period. If that is your investment period, if you're comfortable with those sort of numbers, higher education and school education in India is still a fantastic place to be in, but you have to be somebody who's in for the long run. You cannot expect short-term returns, three to 5 years.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
I about it and spoke at the Planning Commission too.
I'll just make two very quick points. One is, we can talk all about the problems with the Indian education sector. I'm obviously not in India for many, many years, and I'm not operating in the same manner some of the panelists might be. But I want to say something that I am a product of the Indian education system and mighty proud of it. I went to, thank you, I went to a small town, Hindi medium, Narayana Ar Kanya Pathshala in UP, in Farrukhabad. That's where I got my education. Left from here when I was 18 years old to the United States. And within a month, through perseverance, and we can talk about it later, but I got, somehow with my strong will, got admission into the master's program when I was 18 years old. And I can tell you, I survived very well. A year and a half later, I finished my master's from that English medium, of course, there, and got highest marks. So I just want to give my grateful just thanks to the educators here, to anybody who's involved in Indian education system. Kudos from my personal side. I'm very thankful for the Indian education system. The second very quick point I want to make, and that is that education is really not a business. It's different than manufacturing or textile business. And I think some speakers have made that point, and I want to just say that if you want to come in the education sector, follow your passion. See what's in your heart, because an educated person is a common good. The education cannot be run by some of the other motives with which other sectors can be run. So my plea to you would be that as you put your money, which you should put, because there's a lot of need in India, also put a piece of your heart in here, because without that, I think you will get frustrated probably. Thank you.
I will just add to it because let's look at the numbers. The canvas is very large. And the objective of the government in the 12th plan, which is also displaying, it's two ways. Like on the one hand, it's an inclusive equality where they need to bring up about 550 million people within the age group of up to 25. That's an opportunity which is there. And on the other extreme, we talk about the excellence, we talk about the research. So the canvas is too large. So we can't paint the canvas Yeah. So having said that, opportunities do exist, I will say, and the government has already laid this plan, the 12th plan, whereby the investment from the government has gone up from 2 billion in the 10th plan to the 18 billion to the 30 billion now, what they propose. So they are doing the bit what they can. Participation of the private sector has been reluctantly, I will say, in the past, but has been admittedly required, and they are seeking towards it. Not-for-profit is going to be there. We all know that, and there are two sides of the coin, and we can keep debating that. But what needs to be done is probably somewhere a middle path, whereby a portion of it probably which can be like an unregulated sector, or a portion of the services which are surrounding these institutions if they can be allowed to be done on a commercial basis, while the core education sector is kept in a non-for-profit basis. And that's the reality today. If you see any of the private institutions, whether you're doing a tie-up with any collaboration with any foreign university, that's done on a commercial basis. That's not done on a philanthropic basis. Same is true for any services which are being procured, or any infrastructure services being procured from the sponsors or the related companies. There is a margin, where is the profit which is being made on that. Nobody is making a loss on any business, and neither do an organization not for profit can run on a loss. So in end of the day, I would just like to sum up by saying that the objective is large, the number is large, and so do the opportunity and the challenges.
Yeah, I would call the panelists. Unfortunately, well, maybe we can take, Dr. Prasad, two quick questions, because we have got the last session waiting for us. Yes, the gentleman there. Maybe you can briefly just introduce yourself and ask.
Sure.
So
I'm
we'll take one
Kshitij
question
Sharma,
from-
and I work with the policy think tank. My question is, I would like to understand, when we are talking about rankings, one of the key criteria for students to select a particular course is also diversity in classrooms, and where all rest of the students are coming from. How's that playing out for your universities or others that you know of? Because I hardly see any foreign students or students with diverse experiences coming into our classrooms. It really adds to the experience.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Glad to know Renu's ancestral place is from my home state. I have a pertinent question to her. Since she is she represents in the PM's Global Advisory Council. Few years back, it was decided that the diaspora, the diaspora of second generation, third generation, and fourth generation, they have lost their links with the Indian culture and anything. So it was thought that an university be set up in India called the PIO University. How far has it gone? Do you think it is a feasible proposition or not?
Maybe we're just collating questions. So two more questions and then we just respond. So I think, yep.
Studies. I would just like that all the worthy panelists, 1, 2, 3, if they would like to comment upon the overall quality of education in our schools, colleges, and universities. Are you satisfied with the output which we are having in our country? Because when I go to some colleges, the management man says 40% of the graduates can't write an application, 85% don't know IT, and so on and so forth. So are you satisfied with the present system of education and the quality which they are imparting?
Maybe the last question and then we, yeah, yes, sir.
I was most impressed with the comment by Aditya when he said that how the demography suddenly became from a liability side to the asset side. So, I mean, the facts are India has world's 50% of the poor people. India's population density is 2.5 times that of China. Under such conditions, this elite talk about higher universities is great, but it is difficult to see how at the lower end we can really address the people who live on the sidewalks and those who don't have anything to eat or put on a clothes or whatever. And the problem remains that how do we deal with the population bomb? That's the other way of looking at demographic dividend. How do we deal with the population bomb? And are we going to sleep for another 30 years like we slept from Sanjay Gandhi? As far as I'm concerned, it's time to worship Sanjay Gandhi for what he started. And for 30 years, just this is very important. For 30 years, the Indian political leadership have failed in addressing this important issue. And what we need to do, perhaps as a starting point, since we don't like compulsion in any form, is at least the Indian government should be asked to support free birth control, period. Free condoms, free birth control. I mean, no, but that's an important education.
We've got the planning commission member also waiting. We'll just quickly respond.
This is an important educational issue.
1 minute responses to each. Professor Kumar, for the first question.
Quickly for the first question, diversity absolutely key for. Person itself. If you meet somebody from Northeast, South India, there are different languages, different cultures. So a lot of the diversity benefits, the low-hanging fruits, we already get because of the vast number of students from various states. And then we do get students from international sources. Would we like more? Absolutely. But it's still something that India still has to get its reputation up in terms. Most students you'll see are from Africa, Maldives, sort of the third world India-style countries, maybe one step lower. But we are seeing a lot of people who see India as an important skill set. So it's particularly in master's program, a lot of people are coming in for the 1 year, 2 year India immersions.
Thanks. I'll be quick on the quality. Well, you know, it is an acknowledged fact that we have a quality issue, and it's not just in higher education sector. We have to address quality at multiple levels. But as I said before, one of the big problems of addressing quality and quantity together is the fact that we lose sight of one. But then the reason quality becomes important is that, as you rightly said, we are also producing a large number of graduates who may not be employable for even commensurate jobs for which those qualifications are required. And that is one of the big challenges that we are facing today in higher education. And I'm conscious of the fact that we need to respond to it quite effectively.
Quickly add one quick on that. I think the number one thing which we can stop doing is to stop getting jingoistic. Every conference I go to, there's a whole bunch of Indians. India is amazing. We're doing superb. We have great quality. What you're talking about, IITs, IIMs, that's very nice. And even if they are there, that's 10,000 people a year, right? And so first we have to admit the problem, say we need help, and then stop the arrogance. Then go out and say, okay, we need help. How do we ask the right people to help us and incentivize them to come in and help us?
Okay, just very quickly about the separate university for PIOs. There was a discussion about it. I believe that you need to just build excellence and good universities. If you have it, the people will come. They'll come from all over, they will come. Second question about, I think you may not have been in the room when I talked about education as pyramid. There is a base, and that has to be addressed. You cannot simply talk about world-class universities. You have to talk about the base. Graduating more, and I think a collaboration with the model kind of community college model from the United States could be a great collaboration here and could work very well. Thank you.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, with this we come to the end of this session. Yes, the need is enormous, the problems are plenty, but yes, with the right intention and with the right policies, we are going to get there and we are going to make a difference. We spoke about quality. We have somebody sitting right here who spoke about her own a journey from a small town in UP to here. So thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists.